Okay, ready for a spicy one?
Yeah.
Okay. Rob, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that ready for a spicy one is just going to make a great intro for it. So, yeah.
It's as if I knew. It's as if I could see the red light recording.
Fergus Bell, master of the clip economy.
The Signal. You are listening to The Signal.
The Signal.
Cutting through the noise.
You are listening to The Signal.
Hello and welcome to The Signal, the podcast giving a global perspective on journalism, media and technology. This week, it's our final wrap-up from the Marseille Congress that we were at, where we've had two other episodes from, but...
We're back in our home studio.
Home studio in London.
And yeah, we've touched on one of these, what we're going to talk about today in a previous episode, which is the A.G. Sulzberger keynote.
Yeah.
We're going to tell you who A.G. Sulzberger is in a moment.
I'm nervous. I'm nervous because...
Folks coming in hot today.
I'm coming in hot. I'm a bit nervous because we're going to be breaking down this speech with kind of our insights or thoughts about it. But we're going to say stuff that people are not going to be very happy with.
Maybe. We'll see.
Maybe we can justify what we're saying, but I imagine people are going to come up to me and be like, I disagree with what you were saying. Why did you say that?
Great. Do you think it will be as bad as when I said I didn't like the Gilmore Girls on West Wing?
Nothing will compete.
Still getting messages about that.
Nothing will compete with your disdain for Gilmore Girls.
Thank you.
How public you were with that. Okay, so let's set the scene. Actually, no, let's start with a bit of a disclaimer.
Yes. Before we get into what AG was talking about, we want to be open and acknowledge that we, as Fathom, work...
Which is the company that we run.
The company that we run. We co-founded in 2019. Go back to episode 0 if you want to hear that story. A lot of our work at the moment is around AI and helping newsrooms figure out how to make best use of it. Some of that work is directly commissioned by technology platforms, people who build AI tools, Google. Some of it is indirectly supported by technology providers. OpenAI supports the Newsroom AI Catalyst, which is how we've worked with 160 newsrooms over the past 18 months. So we work with, or somewhere in the middle of, the technology platforms and the newsrooms. And we think...
But we are free. We are free to operate in the way that we want.
Yeah, we're not technology salespeople.
No.
And we don't sort of recommend or endorse one technology product over another. The reason that we do the work that is supported by these platforms is because we find them to basically be a unique opportunity for the newsrooms to start thinking about how to use this technology. And for us, that seems fundamental to this kind of ongoing sustainability of the industry.
Yeah, it's not even just use. It's how can you jump on this technology to optimize what you're doing, to really take advantage and make the most of it and seize those exciting opportunities that might improve your business. So we're not just advocating for early adoption so that you can get your workflow set up in your organization. We're advocating for early adoption and kind of throwing yourself into understanding it so that you can capitalize on those products and what opportunities they might bring.
Yeah, and then I also think that, it's only through exposure to this technology that you can kind of understand the potential sort of societal impacts as well. So, I mean, we're going to need to cover AI and technology as journalists. Our audiences are kind of living through this revolution in the same way that we are as newsrooms. And if we don't kind of engage with what the technology can do in our own kind of workflow, then it's going to be very difficult for us to cover it adequately, I think, and help our audiences make sense of it too, because there's going to be a lot of, upheaval, change, and without, I guess, understanding that deeply and kind of intuitively, we're going to not be able to serve those audiences.
So that's the disclaimer. We do work with some of these technology companies directly, indirectly, but we are free agents. We never kind of do things that we're not happy with. And always we are we love journalism. We love the news industry. We've committed our whole careers to supporting the news industry, and our frustrations often stem from that kind of love and frustration with organisations and the way things are done or could be done. So that's that out of the way. Let's set the scene a little bit now in terms of this speech. So the event that we were live from recording from Marseille for a couple of the last episodes. We're now back in London. In Marseille, it was the World Association of News Publishers Congress, which is their big meeting of all of their members. And this organization, more affectionately known as ONE-IFRA, they have a membership of 3,000 publishing companies globally, 40 publisher associations, and across that membership, 18,000 publications are represented in 120 countries. So ONE-IFRA is a big deal in the news and media industry.
Very global network.
Yes. And their big meeting of the year it moves around the world. This year it was in Marseille in France. We were there, and A.G. Salzberger gave the opening keynote.
Who is A.G. Salzberger?
He is the chairman of the New York Times Company and the publisher of the New York Times, which when we talk about publisher, we kind of mean CEO.
This is the top job at the New York Times. He's the most senior person.
Yes. He took over in 2018 as the publisher and became chairman in 2021. He succeeded his father. He is the 5th generation and the 6th member of the Ochs Salzberger family to lead the newspaper. His great-great-grandfather purchased it in 1896, and the family maintains control of the company through the stock structure that they have. In terms of him as an individual, he was a key architect as the New York Times pivoted to digital-first subscriptions. In 2014, he authored a big kind of industry influential report. It was an internal report, but it was the innovation report for the New York Times, which laid the groundwork for modernizing the newsrooms. And under his leadership, they've lent heavily into multimedia, audio, games, and have grown the subscriber base from around 800,000 in 2014 to over 11 million today, which is no small achievement.
Huge achievement. New York Times is very interesting as a business. On an upcoming episode, we will talk about some of the business models and how they make money.
Yeah.
I think really interestingly about him is he's kind of from this dynasty of the publishing family, but he also cut his chops as a reporter.
Yeah.
He began his career with internships and reporting stints at the Providence Journal and the Oregonian, and then he joined the Times as a reporter in 2009 as a Metro reporter, national correspondent, and an editor, strategy editor.
Yeah, he's put in the hours. He's been on the newsroom floor. He's been out in the field.
Very smart guy. He gave a great lecture last year at the Reuters Institute for the study of journalism on a completely different topic. I would encourage you to check that out. In Marseille, but I guess, so Marseille opens, there's lots of kind of formal speeches, the French Minister of Culture, the kind of official welcome from the host organization.
In a big auditorium.
Very nice building. But then the kind of meat of the conference, this is the kind of like the first substantive contribution that's sort of about where we are, what's going on. And AG dedicated his speech to the relationship or the lack of relationship between AI companies and big tech writ large and journalism as an industry. And I think it's fair to say he came out swinging. He was quite outspoken in his remarks, I think, which many in the audience appreciated. Perhaps we'll talk a bit about why later. what we wanted to do today is go through our analysis of what we liked and maybe what we didn't like so much
Yeah.
about the speech.
Yeah, I'm still nervous because I feel like saying some of this out loud is not the done thing, but we have to, because that's why we established this podcast, because we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity to discuss some of these things in more detail. And yes, it's us discussing it, but we have been talking with other people about their feelings. So this is not just
And I think
inside the mind of
while
folks.
in the room there were kind of many nodding heads, there was also, I guess some kind of dissenting views. Not dissenting, I guess, with the way AG talks about the value of journalism. I think there's a lot that we agree with in what he said.
Yeah.
But there's some of the framings, I think, which we think.
Yeah. Okay, let's not skirt around it anymore.
All right.
We do need to do one last bit of scene setting, which
Yes.
is because there's a lot of legal stuff tied up in this. There are lawsuits between these organizations. So, Tom, if you just kind of outline that, and then when we're talking about it, we're not going to actually get into the kind of legalities of it. We're going to talk about the ethics and the feeling and whether this is right or not.
Yes, okay. So the key fact, piece of context, which you may not know, you may not know, is that the New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft and Perplexity. There's quite a lot going on in these cases, but to sort of, and we could do many episodes about the detail of them. I find it very interesting. I don't know if Fergus does. You, the listener, may not. But fundamentally, it's about, did OpenAI and other model providers that they're suing infringe on the New York Times copyright in the way that they used, the tech companies used New York Times data to train the models. That's kind of like at the heart of this. OpenAI claim that they used this content and data under fair use. They say that the use of the New York Times content was transformational. The New York Times pushes very hard against that idea and says, actually, you've just used our content to train something that can replace us. So there are many sort of threads, legal threads, to kind of unpick in that. We're not going to try and go through all of those. But I would just say that this case is kind of a model because it's a very live issue. There are many publishers around the world who have brought similar cases, maybe not at this scale or with this level of visibility, but many publishers bringing cases against AI companies on similar grounds. We have invested in producing this journalism. That is our product. It's our data. It's our copyright. You've taken that and are using it to train basically a rival product. So it's a live issue. It's one that will resonate with many of the publishers in the room. Some publishers have done deals with companies which sort of make this reduce the risk of being sued, I guess, and sort of set a framework for
And
usage.
a deal for a publisher means you license access to your content, whether that's your archive or your content on a day-to-day basis to train an LLM or to display results in a chatbot
Yes.
that you interact with an AI.
Yeah. So many publishers have done these deals. We don't know that much about the deals or how they're structured. Again, this is something that we're going to talk about in a later episode. The New York Times didn't do a deal. They took a different approach. They're suing. In the speech, AG said that they have spent $20 million thus far on this lawsuit, which is an astronomical amount of money. So there's real money at stake here, and we're somewhere in the weeds of.
So
Yeah.
So that's the legal side of it. Let's talk about kind of what he said and the impact that has for the industry, or the approach that he is setting out for, certainly for the New York Times, and was actually trying to, I guess, encourage the industry to maybe adopt as well. So he said, quote, "Tech giants strip mine news websites without permission or compensation. They repackage these stolen goods as their own, siphoning off the audiences and revenue that otherwise would go to the news organizations that created this work." And this happens not just once during the training process, but countless times every single day. I fear we are careening toward a future with fewer and fewer journalists to do the expensive, difficult work of original reporting, going to places, talking to people, digging up information, covering important issues and events, providing context and analysis, investigating the powerful. A future where a crucial wellspring of a healthy society and stable democracy, the truth, understanding, and accountability provided by original journalism, continues to dry up.
Okay, so punchy language. I think strip mining is the key kind of verb here.
Yeah.
It sets it up as this is something, entirely extractive and basically putting at risk, or almost literally putting at risk kind of democracy.
Yeah. Yes. Strip mining is an aggressive term. You're stripping it for parts, like you're taking all value out of it, or stripping the value out for the person that owns it. There is also the language around permission or compensation. So it is important to say that there is a protocol for stopping the training of models on your site. It's the robots.txt, which is some code that you put into your site, and that should stop the training. Whether
I think the claim in the Perplexity case is that maybe it didn't.
Maybe it didn't, but or maybe it did. That's not what we're going to get into. But there is a protocol, which is what gets brought up by a lot of the platforms. And some organizations put it on, and some don't. But then there is also actually other discussions around kind of third party leakage. If your reporting ends up somewhere else and there is not the code in place to stop that scraping, it still ends up in the ecosystem. But permission or compensation means, is kind of saying platforms should ask our permission to use our content and they should pay us. Now, no one has determined how much people should be paid, and no one has determined what the value of that content is. And the discussion has been going for maybe 3 years about this, and I don't think we are
At least, yeah.
any closer. But it's also an argument that's happened before. So when the social media platforms exploded in terms of their use of news content, there were claims that the news industry should be compensated for that, and those claims would be completely valid. But again, no one really said how, or there was no consistent agreement across the industry. And we've actually just had years of the industry asking for reparations.
Yeah.
And I think what one of our frustrations, and we talk about this frequently, is that instead of focusing on the solution, like how do we get paid for this, the immediate thing is how much are we already owed? And that takes all of the air out of the room and never gets to a point that is satisfactory. If it had, we would have seen an easy coalescence around a certain format for it and a case to be made, but that's just not happened.
Right. What is the value of journalism in this process? Now, that's hard to determine. We don't really understand yet the value of the companies or the tech companies or the products that they're building. So it's very hard to work out. But I think you're right. The kind of mindset of, rather than proactively proposing a framework for this and potential values and articulating that, often in the industry we kind of just find ourselves thinking about that kind of thing 2 years too late, and then demanding. I think reparations is probably the right word here. And you see some really fantastic numbers bandied around sometimes in that Google owes us $12 billion for using us in search.
I would say,
So it's an old argument. This is not a new argument
and for the
necessarily.
first time, I think we've heard conversations this week about people being somewhat positive about potential frameworks for compensation starting to emerge, and I would really like to speak to an expert on that at some point to once it's a little bit more evolved, because it's kind of hot off the press, some different ways where how people could be compensated, but it's not there yet. So let's park the kind of value element of this and how much people should even be compensated. Now I'm going to get into it, because we need to talk. I think we hear so much about how the news industry wants to be compensated for its content, how it wants to be treated by people who make money off its content. And something that I've said quietly in rooms is that actually we need to get our own affairs in order as an industry. And by that, I mean, there are some clear double standards here. So let me just go over the quote. They repackage these stolen goods as their own, siphoning off the audiences and revenue that would otherwise go to the news organizations that created this work. For years, you and I have been working with user-generated content, and we were some of the pioneers in terms of how user-generated content was accessed, verified, and used. Much of it arguing for fair compensation for the people that created it. There are people out there every day who are creating content that is used by the news industry. And it is, frankly, ripped off the internet, ripped off the open web, ripped off platforms, and used by the news industry. Now, that's fine. But you can't then say that other people are ripping off your content. And what it often is hidden behind is fair use. And A.G. Salzberger had said something about fair use. He said, all companies take data without consent or compensation. Their explanations for the theft keep shifting. They say innovation requires it. They insist they're just taking facts which no one can own. They complain that deals take too long and cost too much. They claim the fair use doctrine allows them to take content for free anyway. I have sat in newsrooms and I have spoken to hundreds of journalists about fair use. I could take that YouTube video from that person who was there risking their life because it was fair use and it was important for news.
It's public interest.
It's public interest. But we didn't have anyone there because we may not have wanted to send someone there, or we didn't want to be in that position. But it's fair use. If another news organization...
It's out there. It's on a social platform. They've published it.
If another news organization picks up our stuff because they weren't there, then we're going to go after them because that's not fair use. So fair use is something that really gets my blood boiling as an argument, because it's used as a one-way argument. We are going to take something that's newsworthy and we're going to use it because it's got news value. And people want that. People need access to that information. Now, my argument here is that my argument isn't necessarily against that, but it's about saying that other people don't have the right to fair use if it's providing information that people need.
The consistency of the position, right?
It's the consistency.
Like we can't argue that on the one hand, we're not being valued under fair use while simultaneously making our money out of other people's stories, or and I think in our case, other people's content, right? It's like other people have filmed that, other people are reporting that they're there, and we're using that for our purpose.
Yeah, and that frankly is just not right. There's another thing that happens in the industry that makes me think about double standards again, and that is kind of uppicks or pickups of other people's stories. So that is, if someone has an exclusive story, they report it in their publication or on their TV station, and then other organizations who don't have that story report the story and give a minor citation to the original.
Hopefully. Sometimes they don't.
And they are taking original reporting, original journalism, repackaging it, and not fairly compensating either the people that created that or the people that spent the money on producing it. And that is another double standard. Now, again, you can make that argument, but you then can't make the argument that other people are doing that to you and it's not fair.
So your position is, if we're going to make this case of strip mining, then we need to make sure that we're not also out there with picks and shovels mining.
I'm saying that we have to get, that the news industry has to get its house in order, and it has to be, cleaner than clean in how it does it. You can't make an argument and have a double standard, like plainly out there. The final point about this that I would like to make is that, and I'm just going to go back to the quote, which says, they repackage these stolen goods as their own, siphoning off the audiences and revenue that otherwise would go to news organizations that created the work. But that is, there's an argument that you're not being compensated for that. And the money is not going back to the people that created it. The news industry has survived, has grown, is what it is based on the stories that people tell to journalists. Like, there is investigative work, but a lot of the stuff is a story that is given to a journalist in order to do that reporting. Sometimes incredible stories, incredibly heartbreaking stories, powerful stories, brave stories, given freely to journalists. And those people are not compensated for the profit that is then generated through that storytelling. Now, there are so many ethics about paying for stories, and I'm not advocating that you should pay sources. But we need to be able to explain why journalism doesn't pay people for their stories and profits off those stories, turns it into their product and profits off it, but it's not, and why that is different to technology companies taking that and profiting off it. I know there's a difference and I can't articulate it myself, but we have to, as an industry, be able to do that, because I don't believe that all of the listeners to this podcast, that people who don't know this industry see a difference. You say to any journalist, should we pay our sources? They would say no.
Yeah.
You go to any journalist and say, should technology companies pay for access to our stories, or should people pay for our journalism? Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
And we need to explain the difference why, and we've done a terrible job of that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting tension, I think, and it's interesting that you're struggling to sort of articulate because I also can't really articulate it.
But we have to,
because at the same time, there's part of me saying, journalism has value, right? I guess, and I don't disagree that necessarily that OpenAIs of the world should be paying the New York Times. I don't even think OpenAI disagrees with that. But I think it's kind of the legality of it is not the strongest path here. I think it's kind of, how do we proactively set up a shared framework, a shared agreement where we can be compensated for that value, rather than spending $20 million on a lawsuit that they may not win. And I think this is an important piece of this, is if the New York Times loses this lawsuit in such a high profile way, I don't think it will come to that, but because I suspect they'll settle. But if they lose that case, then that is a really strong message that really potentially undermining copyright and the thing that they're trying to defend. I think there's a big risk of that here.
It's a US company on a US company, and that is not a privilege that other people in this world get to do. They are powerful. They get to. The New York Times prides itself on holding power to account and making these types of challenges through its journalism or elsewhere. But that is a privileged position that I'm not really sure. Yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried in the same way that you are. I'm also worried about I about these double standards because it's going to be a sliding scale. We don't know how the use of content in AI in kind of large language models will continue and grow and evolve. And I don't feel that we are treating the sources of stories properly with that in mind. So and just forgive me for like a small like sidebar moment, but when a journalist interviews someone for a story, there has been a kind of clear transaction. Please, can I get your story for this? You know, I'm interviewing you for, it was going to go out on the evening news, or you'll see it on the website later, or you'll see it printed in the paper tomorrow. What we now do is use that storytelling to go and train a model, potentially, if we've done a deal. Now, when you're interviewing someone, have you given them...
Do they know?
Do they know that you are going to use their story, their information to train a model? Their name is potentially... Like, are names being extracted from this training of models? I don't know. I would like to know. But what is the transaction now when you speak to someone? And how does that impact the massive, massive problem of trust in journalism and trust in journalists and trust in institutions? So should we be interviewing people? Should we be using sources for stories that then get used forever and ever, get stored in the archive, get used for training models?
Good question.
Because
we're also storing a lot more, right? Because it's
it.
AI that's transcribing those interviews. That transcript is going to be kept forever. And yeah, it's really interesting.
And I think we have to have the answer. I don't know the answer. I wish I could kind of say this is the answer. I would get absolutely annihilated if I did try. But
I think your frustration here is that, and I think this is also my frustration, is that in the way that Salzberger sort of approached this speech, it anchors the conversation around and a part of this issue, which is the kind of value of newsrooms' product to AI companies. But that then sort of like obfuscates what needs to be a much bigger conversation around public value, around data transparency, around, you know, where does my data end up? Am I getting the value? It's okay if you're getting the value and 6 middlemen are getting the value, but does any of that come back to me? And I think this is sort of ties into a lot of our conversations that we have with creators who are also kind of concerned about this. They don't have the institutional heft of the New York Times, but yeah.
Do they even know about robots.txt?
Do they know? I don't know. It's a good question. For my little sidebar, in researching, trying to find the kind of facts of the case about the New York Times, I stumbled across a Harvard Law Review piece which took a very interesting look at a case from the early 2000s. I think it was at the Supreme Court in 2001, which also involved the New York Times, and it also involved copyright. In this case, the New York Times was being sued by some of its freelancers who felt their copyright had been infringed when the New York Times took their work and put it in a digital database, like a digital archive. And what's the blog, which we'll share in the show notes, makes the point that at the time the New York Times was making the same arguments against the freelancers that OpenAI is making now, which is that, you know, fair use is around stopping technological innovation. The New York Times lost that case. Maybe they have learned something from that, and it's fine to change your position on some of these matters. But I think it's really interesting that not that long ago, in just a slightly earlier era of kind of this transition to digital, the New York Times was making the exact opposite case against its own freelancers. So yeah, this question around kind of
I'm
double
sure they would
standards.
argue that it was a different situation. Um, uh, but is any difference clear
But
to
it
anyone
gets
else? Like,
it's relevant to what you're saying, which is, in that case, the freelancers are saying, our work has value. We've been paid for that. Now you're using it in a way that's wasn't part of that agreement, and that's what the
Mhm.
Supreme Court ultimately upheld. So I think this question of like, how does value move in this new world is really interesting. I think our frustration is that it gets a bit lost in kind of big speeches that are very squarely taking aim at tech companies without any kind of reflection on what we're doing.
he kind of ended his speech. I'm skipping to the end for a moment. He said 4 ways to defend your work from tech giants, like coming out swinging, stand up for your rights, deal carefully, push your legislators, join together. Stand up for your rights, fine. Deal carefully. Only the big legacy organizations have a
Deal
seat at the
deal
table
carefully
when
if
it
you're
comes
lucky,
to
yeah.
negotiating deals. Like deals are not. You do a deal with a big organization because they've got a lot of content. The deals they're not done with the smaller organizations really, unless there's something particularly unique about them to fill a gap. And so deal carefully is an incredibly kind of privileged statement to say because it's assuming that other people get deals.
Yeah.
And I think this comes back to like the rest of the journalism industry does look to the New York Times, but if we work with people with publishers in Latin America and Asia, they don't get deals. There's no deal on the horizon for them. They're not expecting a deal. But then when they hear the publisher of the New York Times stand up and say deal carefully, it suddenly puts that back on the table for them. And I think that's a really unhealthy thing to be waiting for because they're just not coming. And I don't that's not the tech companies kind of intentionally slighting an organization or excluding them. That's them saying we've trained the model in the way that we need to, and we don't need to do multiple deals with people. Push your legislators it was the third point. Like that means that you've got a legislative system that would be in your favor for that, or
Legislators who understand what's going
legislators who
on, which has
understand,
been,
or that you have the money to do it. And again, like I'm not even saying we're not saying that you should like bring in legislation, but just to say that you have to push that and then join together. Now, on the joining together, there's something called spur, and I'm just trying to find the quote. Yeah, okay, yeah. So on the issue of joining together, actually 2 days after the Congress in Marseille, 18 new publishers from 7 countries joined something called Spur, which is a coalition started by 5 UK major news organisations, BBC, Financial Times, Guardian, Sky, and The Times, aiming to create standards on how content is used and licensed by AI companies. The New York Times was not among them, nor any other US companies. So there are people joining together. I don't know why the New York Times is not joining together with those organisations. It would be great to find out. But again, this is based on the fact that they're trying to secure deals that might not be coming. And really, is that, like, I want to ask, is that the best use of time when we're talking about, how to move forward in a post-AI world?
I think broadly, as we've worked a lot on collaboration. Broadly, coming together is a good thing. Spur needed to have happened 6 or 7
Yeah.
years ago, I would
Before
say.
before any deals, right?
Before deals and before training.
Yeah.
And I was showing newsrooms GPT-2 in 2020. Like, if you were following this stuff at the time in a way that we were trying to get people to switch on to, then you would have had more power and more agency. But because then you could have worked on robots.txt, you could have locked down assets that you didn't want included in training. You could have taken really protective action at the time. Now, I'm not even sure that there's much of a training conversation left. I think most of training has been done. I think most of the deals right now are about inference and using the stuff. But so what we need to avoid, and maybe Spur can do this, is less about sort of now in 2026, but whatever's coming in 2030, Spur needs to be focusing on the future, because that's where we need to, that's where we need to be looking, right?
You said
Spur could have happened in 2020.
it could have happened. You said that the organizations would have more power and agency if they'd have done that. I argue that they have power and agency right now, but it's not in coalition building around licensing or training. It's around like adopting standards based on the current situation. It's about, fully implementing and adopting and building things without other people building it first.
Yes.
And people, someone said to me, like, "Oh yeah, but it's too expensive and it's too risky." Yes, it is too expensive and it is too risky to build. But the people who do that,
taking those risks and investing that money,
they reap the rewards, and it wouldn't be fair for other people to reap the rewards without taking that risk. This industry that we love so much has to start taking some risks and has to be bold in what it wants to achieve, and not looking back at how it's been slighted.
I was watching there's a good talk from Nikita Roy at the Nordic AI Media Summit, and I think she captured it. That summit was just before Marseille, but so there's a bit of, maybe it's foreshadowing, but she, I sense, is also frustrated, and the way that she framed it, which I agree, is that we often in the industry approach this conversation with a kind of a loss mindset, and how, we're losing this, we're losing this, we're losing this, we're losing this. And in all of that, we miss the opportunity to focus on the new audiences that we can serve, the new ways that we can serve them, the new products that we can build, the new revenue. Like, we're so focused on making this case that, we've not been paid what we're due, that we don't focus enough on the investment side and the new opportunities that could come.
We were speaking to a very influential AI kind of news guru the other day who said there were two tracks. It was David Caswell, and he said that he thinks that there's people who are basically ignoring AI, and there are people who are leaning into AI. And those tracks are getting further and further apart. So I got all hot and bothered, and we went way over time discussing the speech. And so this is now actually the end of part one. We're going to continue the conversation in part two. If you want to follow that, please make sure that you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and also give us your comments based on your feedback from this episode. We'll see you in part two.
You don't want to miss it.